So I want to talk about Matthew because you mentioned you come on the job and this is a huge decision that you have to make almost immediately. What was the dialogue with him like? How did you initially establish it? What did you guys talk about early on? How did you get to the place that you eventually reached?
Yeah, he was very professional, very mature. He handled everything. As far as in the interview process and evaluating the roster, like I was talking about, obviously, you're evaluating Stafford, and he's a very talented quarterback. And so you're just like, wow, like you're a big fan. And I've always been a big fan. I remember, just scouting the Southeast and University of Georgia when he came out, like you knew all the skill set and ability he had. But, the way that he handled things, the way that he communicated everything, you even became a bigger fan of him in those regards. And he was very clear and upfront, professional. And it was it was a very mutual, very, very amicable conversations that we had about it. And so there was never any time where it was kind of like an awkward or uncomfortable. And we both knew what we were trying to accomplish. And I believe we did end up making that happen.
If he didn't want to have a fresh start, if he was open to staying, would you have wanted him to be part of what you guys were building? Because like you said, when you're watching a guy that's that talented, I'm sure your football brain goes to, oh, we can win with this guy. Like, so we can quickly get where we want to go if this guy is our quarterback. So if he had wanted to stick around, how would you have balanced trying to be good in the short term with maybe needing more resources for the long term?
Yeah, that's a great question because, when you're preparing for the interview process, like I was saying about evaluating the roster, yeah, you're preparing that he is the quarterback. And so, and that was one of the things that, looking at him with the caliber of talent he does have, it's like, yeah, no, you're excited about working with Stafford. And I'm sure the previous regime were, about
sure.
Being excited about working with a guy with his caliber of talent. But, and it's the same thing with when the trade actually was executed is that, I didn't know that, that we would land Jared Goff, within that. And I didn't know. So you just never know how all those things are going to work. But we're very happy about it. I think it was a win-win at the end of the day. But we were prepared to go to do this with Matthew, starting out for sure.
With Jared, I'm so interested in how you think he fits what you're trying to do, because from an outsider's perspective, my thought would be, all right, it's teardown time. Like, we need to start over here. Let's slow play this. Let's take the long view on it. And a $30 million quarterback, I know it's 10, I think, this year, and then his cap, I think, is 30 next year. That's an expensive quarterback. That's real financial resources you'd be devoting to that guy. So why did you want to do that? Why did you want to commit to a quarterback even on a 2-year basis rather than saying we're going to trade Matthew somewhere and just get picks and try to stopgap that position until we find our guy of the future?
Yeah, well, that was the intriguing part of the trade is that, yeah, obviously the draft capital is great, but, having to be able to also get Jared and actually the record that he's done, I think his resume speaks for itself in terms of the amount of wins that he's had, in the past four years is among the top in terms of all the league. But so that's what you got to be excited about. And you hear a lot of the outside noise, which you try to just kind of have to just block out. But, when I think about Jeff, I said, well, the last time I saw him was, he was starting a divisional playoff game, on the road and completing over 70% of his passes and doing that with a broken hand. And so then you find that and, what the one thing that I have always known about Jared is his toughness, and his physical and mental toughness. And that's always stood out to me ever since he was a rookie when he got thrown in. And, with the Rams, it wasn't great situation from an offensive line standpoint. And, he took a beating, but he kept getting up. So I knew that Dan's vision of having a team that has grit and toughness, I knew Jared would fit that, but I thought it was a win-win. It made a lot of sense for both sides, and to acquire him in terms of also on top of the draft capital, we felt good about.
I remember talking to him in the tunnel after the Super Bowl, and he was just beat to hell. I mean, it just scrapes all over his arms. And he was clearly he had a rough night, obviously. And that always stuck with me, just seeing how physically beat up he had been that night and the fact that he kept taking those hits and stood in. There were a couple of throws in that second half that were just really impressive plays after what he had been through the rest of that game. So I totally understand that. And when you're trying to balance being reliable at certain positions while rebuilding the roster, how do you try to find that balance? How do you try to say, all right, we need stability here and here? I'm thinking about Michael Brockers too, where you're going out and getting a stabilizing veteran presence. How do you try to thread that needle between we don't want to commit ourselves to a certain version of the roster, but we also need stabilizing veteran presences on both sides of the ball? Because that's a delicate balance, it seems like.
Yeah, and I think that's the uniqueness. It actually made the job a little bit more fun from a roster building standpoint because you did have to balance that. But that was the uniqueness, I say specifically this year. This offseason, and especially the heat of free agency with so many one-year deals signed, and so I thought that was pretty kind of unique in terms of so many one-year deals, and then on top of being a brand new regime, that we're signing these players that we're really, really excited about. And that's the one thing Dan and I said, look, we're not going to just, like what's often said, just bridge guys so we can have just a body there just to kind of hold down the fort as we build. And I was like, we signed all guys that we were excited about and guys that we like. So when we, even with the trade with Stafford to have Jared Goff, and then to the trade that involved Brockers to have, and we were excited about that. We were excited to add a Jamal Williams, a Tyrell Williams, a Rashad. I mean, those guys, a Quentin Dunbar. We were excited to add those players, and even if they were shorter deals, I think it's a perfect kind of, let's just call it a perfect marriage, because we all have something to prove. And Dan has mentioned it over and over again. I mean, it's his first year as, head coach in this franchise. My first year as GM. And a lot of those guys have something to prove. And so I think it's going to just work out that way where hopefully we can prove people right.
It's interesting with Michael because you have knowledge of him. You'd been around him and you know what he is and the presence he has in the locker room. I'm sure Aubrey Pleasant had some input on that as well. But Dan probably doesn't. So when you're thinking about that guy being kind of a culture builder for you, how do you initiate that conversation with Dan and let him know, all right, this is a guy you're going to want around as you build the foundation of this thing?
Yeah, that was one that Dan often would pace around my office back and forth and just saying how much we got to get this guy, because Dan had knowledge about previous matchups with the Saints and the Rams. And I remember it wasn't really a lot of selling that I had to do towards Dan, because when Dan and I first spoke about, the matchups that, that the Rams and Saints had, immediately I'm thinking him being an offensive coach, he's immediately going to talk about Aaron Donald. And so, and obviously it's like Aaron Donald's Aaron Donald. I mean, he's unstoppable, but he kept talking about Brockers, and he kept talking about how much of an issue it was, how what Brockers posed offensively were certain things that they couldn't do here and there because of Brockers. And so then when I talked to Dan about just how much of a leader and culture setter he is, that just kind of even heightened the excitement about acquiring him. So it kind of just, not a whole lot of selling that had to be done, but it was good that he was already a big fan. And then, him being a total culture fit made a ton of sense.